Afternoon, everybody. Another beautiful day here in the shop. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to go ahead and build out my left Y rail. I'm going to show you how I go about mounting the linear rails, ball screws, and motor onto this rail. First thing that we want to do is go ahead and mark a center line on our rail. And to do that, I've got one of these little printed, it's just a printed center line finder for the rail. I'm going to try to stay out of your way as much as possible. And that'll just give us kind of a reference as we're doing the rest of that. Now, as I told you in one of my other videos, these linear rails that I got are 1,500, I can get into it, are 1,500 millimeters, which is about 50 millimeters too long for a 1,550 millimeter ball screw. So these rails, I was going to have to do something. I had the option of cutting them off, cutting 50 millimeters off, but I didn't want to go that route. I found it was easier to take the bearing blocks and actually hollow out a little piece. So what will happen is those linear rails will slide up in here, and I've actually got about 51 millimeters of give in these blocks. So this will be a little different. Normally these blocks are just flat on both sides and you butt your linear rail up to it, but this will also give me the advantage of holding the rail center, and I've got a few other center finding tools in there as well. So the BF block is going to be on the back. The BF block you can tell because it only has 2 bolt holes for the bearing block. So you're going to drop that on first. And I like to just use a little hammer to kind of tap it on home. And then your rail, hopefully, will slide right up into that. Next, I'm going to put the BK block. And you can tell the BK block because it's got 4 bolt holes. And if you can remember that the BK block is the one that takes all of the forces of your ball screw, you can remember that it needs twice as many bolts to hold it down. So again, if you lift your rail up a little bit and slide that in, knock it on home. Now, your bearings and your ball screws will need to be on because of the way that I'm doing this. This will move back and forth a little bit depending upon where your ball screw comes into play. Let me get this box out of the way. And this is how the ball screws came packaged from China. They're in a piece of, I mean, it looks like drain waste vent pipe, but it works. Comes well packaged. With bubble wrap all around it. We use a knife just to slit this tape. And there's my ball screw. That will mount here, so we need to go ahead and dig out our bearing blocks. Okay, this is my, hopefully my bearing blocks. This is how they come packaged. All three of my ball screws, they were all in those orange boxes over there, kind of taped together. These were taped on top. These boxes kind of took a beating on the way from China, but everything appears to be intact. I'm not sure what they could mess up on these bearing blocks anyway, at least from shipping damage. These are the ones that I ordered off of Amazon. These did come well packaged. When you pull these blocks out, there is a little clip. Don't let that get too far away from you. And the same thing with the BK blocks. There should be a small nut and washer in there. I'm not going to use those at this point just because I'm just setting this up. I'm going to have to take all this apart. Again, I will bury it. So here's your BK block, your BF block. Again, 4 bolts and 2 bolts. So one will go here and one will go here. I'm going to go ahead and bolt these to the standoffs. I'm going to use a driver. If you're using a driver, make sure you're not going too fast. If you run them in too fast and get them too hot, you'll melt your PLA. And you don't need to have them super tight. Like so. Now, for your BK, you want to go ahead and mount that onto your ball screw. All right, so we got the BK12 mount on there, got it all synced up. You could run the screw on there. I'm not going to because I'm going to tear all this apart again in just a minute. So insert your make sure that you get your mount all the way seated in there. You want to keep your bearing block as close to flush to the back as you possibly can. A little rap, tap, tap. Now, normally you wouldn't have to go have any issues with aligning these, because these blocks will butt right up against the end of your linear rails. With my configuration, it's going to take a little bit, so I'm going to have to finesse these in just a little bit. Like so. I'm going to go ahead and bolt this down. I'm going to use 2 bolts, just because I'm going to have to immediately take this all back apart. There's no sense in running 3. Again, when you're driving a bolt into PLA, make sure that you're not going too fast so you'll warp your PLA or melt it. Again, drive them in until you hear the PLA crack and then back it off a 1/4 turn. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. for the rail, you can see, even though this rail is fairly supported on both ends, I do have some of these 3D printed center finder spacers. Got two of them. I thought I had three. I probably have one floating around here somewhere that will mount like so. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to install is I'm going to go ahead and mark out for my stepper motor. Now, I did use a steel mount for my stepper motors, and the reason why is because I'm going to be driving the heck out of these stepper motors, and I don't want to run into an issue with the PLA on the standard motor mounts. Hopefully you all can see that. This is a motor mount. I doubt it would be any problem, but that's kind of thin, even though I printed these at I think 75 or 80% infill. I don't want to run into any problems with warping those or losing rigidity. So what I did is basically I just went into CAD and I marked these off and I shortened this into this. So this spacer will snap on somewhere in here. Go ahead and put my little cheapo coupler on there. If you want to, you can go ahead and tighten this coupler up just while you're doing this so that it doesn't slide back and forth like so. That should hold it on there fairly well. And then for mine, I'm actually going to have to drill another set of holes in the bottom of this motor mount. So what I want to do is I just want to kind of tap this motor mount and get it somewhat centered up. Get it somewhat centered up on the motor mount. Make sure everything is set down in place. I can turn that, doesn't feel too rough. You can look at it and see if you're lined up. I can tell that it's lined up by looking for light underneath that motor mount. So it's pretty good. You want it to look straight on. And then how I mark my motor mount, my steel motor mount to that plastic, is I use a piece of double-sided carpet tape. I'm going to loosen these mounts. And then I just take my double-sided carpet tape and put it right on my 3D printed part. And then I'm going to turn a corner over. I'm going to line everything back up. Line it up eyeball accurate. Make sure you're kind of centered there. And then I'm just going to hopefully get this off all in one piece. And now my mount is glued to my block. So what I'll do is I will just use a little nail, maybe give that just a little rap, tap, tap, kind of center it up. Now whenever I pull that off, I've got my holes marked, and that's where I'm going to drill for my bolts. So we'll set that aside. I want to kind of get my rail where I want it to be. So again, with my setup, you wouldn't have to do this if you're not crazy and ordering the wrong parts. I do have a little wobble in my linear rail. So it doesn't necessarily matter exactly where this linear rail is, but I'm going to set it, and then I'm going to clamp it down so that it doesn't move while I'm marking out my pieces. Tighten it pretty good, a little past forearm tight. One would probably hold it, but if one is good, two is more gooder. So that's clamped in there. It's not going anywhere. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my ball screw off. Again, same thing if you're using a drill driver in this driving bolts or taking bolts out of PLA. Go slow. We have the bolts out on this end. Let me get the bolts out on the other end. So once you get your ball screw unbolted from your ball screw mounts, set it aside. Now we're ready to, at this point, make sure you don't shift anything. Now we're just going to go down the row marking each of these holes. Now on the motor mount, to do that, and I'm not sure if I showed it on video, but I just put a pencil mark on there where that wants to go. Now because you're using that coupling, you've got a good couple of millimeters that you could be off either way. Before you use one of these dead blow hammers, always move your thumb first. It helps out. So now I can just drop down and mark each one of these holes. So I'm going to mark the 2 holes on my motor mount, the 3 holes on each one of my bearing mounts, and then the, 1,050 holes in the for the rail. So how I like to do that, your mileage may vary, is I just like to use a drill that is slightly smaller than the holes. And so to mark out this rail, I'm just going to go right down the line, and I'm going to mark every one of those holes. And to do that, again, I've got this primered, so all I need to do is scratch the paint. So I'm going to start with my motor mount. And this one's easy. I'm going to go ahead and pull it off and say, yep, it's working. So again, 3 screws on my BK. Before you get all of this pulled off, just go back and make sure that you have marked every hole. I can see where I forgot one here. Those are good. I may have to tap this back just a touch to get to that last one. There we go. So now we've got all of our holes marked. I'll go ahead and pull this rail off, take it over to the drill press. I'll drill a pilot hole for each one, then I will drill the holes for the taps, and then I will tap all of them. I'm not going to do that. I did that whenever I built the rail. Most of you probably know how to drill and tap. If you don't, this probably is not the project for you. I will tell you just a little caveat. I went and bought some of these Milwaukee drill and tap sets. Cost me, I think, $30 at the Home Depot. The 6mm one has worked fairly well, and I will probably use that for my 6mm holes. The 5mm holes, first one that I did, snapped off in there, and now I'm missing a bolt on that particular linear rail. So I can't recommend these. Could be user error, could be just these things are not really meant to drill through and tap 3/16" steel. They're probably, you know, more for the 1/8 inch or thinner. So I think I got one hole tapped, so I know it would go through, and then on the second one it broke, and I'm not about to dig it out. We're just going to have to be short a bolt. I don't think that that's going to make a huge difference, just because there's no lateral load, or not much lateral loads on these rails. So these bolts, if you screw up a hole and you have to skip one, especially on this size, you're probably never going to notice it. Try not to do that, but if you do, it's not the end of the world. I could go back and grind out that tap, weld the hole up, and re-drill and tap it, but I'm not going to do that. So we've got all of our holes tapped. Everything's good. I'll be back in a few minutes, and we'll put this thing back together and bolt it down. So I did get all of my holes tapped and drilled. I just wanted to show you real quick what I ended up doing with this motor mount. Again, this is the original motor mount. It is all printed out of PLA. It's pretty sturdy, but I didn't want to take any chances. So again, I modified this one, and all I did is I just went in and downloaded the file to SketchUp and did a push, basically, and made it the right height. I went ahead and cut holes in this mount. These holes didn't come. Those are 6.5mm holes. That should give me a little bit of wiggle room, just to make sure everything gets lined up right. Get these screws started by hand. So get it straightened up, torque down about that much, and then now we're going to go ahead and put our rails on, and then we'll put our ball screw on. I still yet have to actually drill the holes in the roller, but we'll get that done. So let me back you up so you can see how this rail is going to go back on. I got all of my screw holes tapped and drilled. There were 25 total for the rail, and then another 8 for the mounts. So all of your mounts are going to be 6mm, and your rail is going to be 5mm. So kind of get these pre-positioned. Get my rail ready. So now we've got our screws all tightened down. Now I'm going to go ahead with the rail. I'm just going to kind of eyeball it and make sure that everything is still lined up. And yep, everything still looks good. These are all M5 screws. So I'm going to find the right driver for the M5s. Again, at this point, you just want to put them in. You don't want to torque anything down. So get them started. Most people would tell you to start in the middle and work yourself out. Again, just loosen them. Actually, at this point, I just want to get them below, the heads below the rail, so that I can put everything else on. And then once we do our final assembly, then we can go in and get these all torqued down once we get everything lined up. But at this point, nothing's lined up. None of the rails are squared. They're just kind of, everything's 2 or 3 threads holding it all together. So I'll keep on with this. I'll go ahead and spare you all the boredom of watching me screw in 25 screws. I'll be back in a minute when we put the ball screw on and then finally the motor. So I went ahead and mounted my Y-roller onto my linear rail for my Y-axis. So we will go ahead and get our ball screw mounted. And now this ball nut is way too far down. So what I want to do to get that down, you can either roll it back manually, or you can just chuck a drill on the end of this ball screw like that. And bring that on back down. Now, you want everything down on this end, because next up we are going to mount our x-gantry, and you want to be able to move these, or at least I want to be able to move these roller blocks. And once you get these roller blocks and you get your gantry squared up, then you can run these onto your ball nuts. Okay, so I do have my motor mount almost back on here. Now, do yourself a favor when you're mounting these motors. If you use one of these metal plates, don't try to come in from this side. It's a pain to try to get to that little screw back there. Or, I'm sorry, to hold that nut back there. If you come through this way, your nuts are out here where they're accessible. Okay, so I went over to the drill press and I drilled 5 6.5 millimeter holes. Those correspond with my number 6 plate. Now, generally before you want to attach your x-gantry, you want to have your Z all built, you want to have your linear rails in place, but I am impatient as all get out, so I want to go ahead and mount this up just so it looks like a CNC machine. So I'm going to get this flipped over. I'm going to move the camera back a little bit. I'm going to run some screws in here, and I'm going to show you how I'm going to mark the other side because it gets a little tricky. my little trick, which really isn't a trick, I think one of the guys mentioned it in Discord. This contraption here, again, the other end, it would just reference off the end of your workpiece for your x-gantry. This side, you could probably do that if this was an ideal world and everything was lined up perfectly. But this should line up with the holes in your roller block. So I'm going to verify that first, and it does. And then I'm going to use, again, a piece of this carpet tape. Again, make sure you're semi kind of almost square. Peel back a little bit. Again, I'm just going to mash it. This carpet tape doesn't stick to this PLA all that great. So again, I've got that on there. I'm going to slide this out. I'm going to look down, verify that my holes are there, and then I'm square on that side, and then I'm just going to drop it in like so. So next plan is to go over and take those screws out that I just put in on that end, and then I'll flip this over, mark these, drill them, and then we'll be back. All right, so I did get at least a couple of holes drilled out on the other side of the x-gantry. So this is much easier to do once you put your motor mounts on the top, because then you have access for these back bolts. What I'm going to do right now, just for no other reason than I need to feel like I had a win today, is I'm just going to mount these outer two bolts, because I have not drilled my x-gantry. So I'll mount these two, mount the two on the other side, and then I'm going to call it a win for the day. Again, it's getting up late in the evening, as we say here in the South. Whoop, fall down. Getting up late in the evening here in the South, so I will get these bolts just kind of snugged up. Then I'm going to go over here on the other side, and hopefully these all line up as well. We got both of our Y rails taken care of, ball screws mounted, everything's mounted. I'm doing this a little crazy. I'll end up tearing this all back down, which has always been my plan, because I'm going to paint this probably some sort of automotive grade paint. Get it looking sharp, get it looking nice, just because it seems like the right thing to do. Now I will tell you, I did not put all 4 bolts in this x-gantry. I was talking to some of the guys on the Discord channel about whether it's easier to go down from the x-gantry into the Y roller or up. To be honest with you, I tried to run the bolts up through the Y gantry or the Y roller. I don't think it makes a difference. I think it's going to be a pain in the butt to get to those back 2 bolts. So I'm going to lay everything out on this x-gantry. I'm going to lay my linear rails out, see where my motor mounts fall. It should be pretty much identical to the Y rollers. It'll just be up here, and I'll probably just knock out some access holes on here, hopefully. We'll see how that goes, but for now, I'm gonna call it a day. It's kind of chilly here in South Mississippi. It's dropping down into the 30s for right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and get cleaned up and call it a night. And so far, I'm gonna call this a win. Thanks for watching. Hit me up on the Facebook group. If you get a chance. I will be posting at least links and pictures and everything else. I'm not really an Instagram guy. I have an Instagram account, but I'm not terribly active with it. But so it's starting to look like a mega-sized PrintNC CNC. I got at least a couple more days. I'm hoping before I go back to work next week to have at least all of the machinery part of it finished and complete. So there you go. Have a good one.